don't really have a podium, but speak right here.
It goes in this order. MC concept.
I didn't like that circle in the middle.
The only place where there's a wall is it goes negative, then, sorry. Bless you. We question y'all and then we do this.
Okay, you ready? Jake? Okay, you ready? What's the motion again? Tell me one more time.
What's the resolution? What are we doing?
The motion?
Oh,
Tell me again.
Physician-assisted suicide should be legal or not in the United States.
This house would... How does it go?
Oh, physician-assisted suicide should become legal in all states.
It definitely starts with this house. Right?
This house states that physician-assisted suicide should become legal in all states.
States that? That can't be right. Okay. No problem. I'm ready when you are.
Alright.
Let's do it.
Physician-assisted suicide is the act of indirectly killing someone. If a doctor, the difference between euthanization and physician-assisted suicide is that euthanization is the direct killing of someone, while physician-assisted suicide is the indirect killing of someone. Physician-assisted suicide, say you put a plastic bag over someone's head, that's euthanization. Or say the physician or doctor directly inject someone with something that could kill them or will kill them, that's euthanization. Physician-assisted suicide is the indirect killing. If the doctor gives them prescription pills or gives them something, they could commit the act of committing suicide. Terminally ill people, the U.S. only acts towards terminally ill people when it comes to physician-assisted suicide. And terminally ill is a person who is sick and diagnosed with a disease that will take their life. This person is usually told by doctors that they only have several months to a year to live. Symptoms for pain in the last days of life. Symptoms commonly experienced at the end of life include pain, delirium, dyspnea, and rattle. Dyspnea, described as shortness of breath or in hunger, is a common symptom in people with cancer during their final days of week of life. Fatigue at the end of life is misdimensional and underlying pathway is poorly understood. Factors that may contribute to fatigue include physical changes, physiological dynamics, and adverse effects associated with the treatment of the disease or associated symptoms. Polls state in America that actually more people support physician-assisted suicide than they are against it. According to research, 66% of U.S. adults believe that a doctor or nurse should be allowed to commit physician suicide, and that's from the Health Research Funding Board. For doctors also, there's actually doctors more believe in physician-assisted suicide as well. An oncologist survey, and a survey of 3,299 oncologists, all members of American Society of Clinical Oncology research found 22.5 supported the use of physician-assisted suicide for terminally ill patients, as opposed to 17% that did not oppose. Physician-assisted suicide should be legal in all states in acceptance of human rights and peaceful deaths.
Okay. You have to stand back up this time for questions. We went over this. Yeah.
Okay, so you believe that if the patients are in a lot of pain, it's okay to do it, it's okay to,
Only if they're terminally ill.
but if I can prove that they aren't in as much pain, then do I win this debate?
No, you do not win this debate because the debate is for terminally ill in America. America is the one who does it for terminally ill.
Okay, the court defines terminally ill patients as people who need medicine.
Need medicine and have months to years to live.
Okay. Next, you claim autonomy. If I can prove that autonomy is lessened and coercion is a result, do I win this debate?
No. I don't know.
You can repeat it.
Yeah.
Autonomy. You claim autonomy. If I can prove autonomy is lessened and coercion is a result, do I win this debate? The next point. You claim physician-assisted suicide is a solution. If I prove our solution is better and physician-assisted suicide is unethical, do I win this debate?
No, you do not win this debate because physician-assisted suicide is meant to bring someone out of their pain or a terminally ill person out of their pain before death.
No further questions.
Okay. Fine.
Is it okay if I timer?
Sure.
Okay. It'll go off when you're done. Okay. Okay. For this round, we're going to have two definitions. One for physician-assisted suicide is defined by the Americans United for Life Journal. Physician-assisted suicide, quote, the terms aid in dying, death with dignity, and patient-directed dying are merely euphemisms for the practice. In fact, these terms are not recognized by the medical community and are simply used by suicide advocates to mask what they actually advocate. According to Webster's dictionary, a person skilled in the art of healing is the definition of a physician. Our case is composed of three main arguments. Pain and discomfort. While terminal patients do experience some measure of pain and discomfort due to their illness, this is not the leading reason for physician-assisted suicide. Number two, the legislation of physician-assisted suicide causes the quality of care to decline. And number three, physician-assisted suicide is not an ethical practice. So back to pain and discomfort. While terminally ill patients do experience some pain, most patients who want to commit physician-assisted suicide do it for mental reasons, such as depression. In a study done, 90% of people who wanted to commit physician-assisted suicide changed their minds after being treated for depression. And 95 to 98% of all pain can be alleviated according to pain management specialists. And both of these statistics come from the Americans United for Life Journal. And additionally, some of the most frequent committers of physician-assisted suicide are patients with Lou Gehrig's disease, which is a disease in which patients feel no pain. Number two, the legalization of physician-assisted suicide causes the quality of care to decline. Should physician-assisted suicide be legalized, there are the potential consequences it will only decrease the quality of care. Poor medical treatment for the terminal patients, undiagnosed or untreated medical illness, improperly managed physical symptoms, insufficient attention to the suffering of peers and of dying patients, devaluation of the lives of the disabled. This continues as the option of physician-assisted suicide makes patients feel obligated to comply and follow their doctor's recommendations. It gives a sense of obligation, causes patients deference to physician recommendations, and causes vulnerability of socially marginalized groups. Finally, increasing financial incentives to limit care. This also continues as the law has no certain boundaries and therefore cannot be controlled or monitored. Arbitrariness of proposed limits and possibility of developing effective regulation. And all of these come from the National Right to Life News Today. The definition of terminal patients set up by the courts is extended to patients who do not have serious illnesses. The time of death and circumstances surrounding death have only been reported when a physician is present in Oregon and according to Oregon's government paperwork. The quality of care has declined in Oregon since the legalization of physician-assisted suicide. For pain management, Oregon has gotten rid of almost all pain management clinics and even hospitals. Overall treatment of terminal patients over the past 7 years since the Death with Dignity Act, nurses report a 50% decline in the quality of care since passing the act. Physician-assisted suicide is not an ethical practice. Things will get out of control here just like they have in other areas of Europe, and U.S. physicians are opposed to physician-assisted suicide. Solvency. Instead of physician-assisted suicide, patients who are truly suffering can already legally in all 50 states receive palliative sedation, which will alleviate all pain until the patient dies a peaceful and natural death. We need to focus energy on better care for the dying to ensure open conversation about palliative care and hospice can be discussed in safe environments, and that we are doing everything we can to encourage the best life possible and not telling our terminally ill patients that they should die instead. It is for these reasons that I urge a negative ballot on this motion of physician-assisted suicide.
Yeah.
Okay.
Questions?
You stated it's not technically right. Why?
Because it is allowing, there's many reasons. For one, it allows people to devalue the life. People are going to listen to their physicians. In many areas, they will cover physician-assisted suicide, the cost for that, but they will not cover the care needed to keep the person alive.
So you're saying it's ethically right for you to not allow the patients to choose whether if they want to die happily or suffer?
Instead of physician-assisted suicide, like we said, patients who are truly suffering can, in all 50 states, receive palliative sedation, which will alleviate all pain until the patient dies a peaceful and natural death.
And that's what we stated as what physician suicide is in our beginning.
No, this is not physician-assisted suicide. This is where they go into almost a comatose, and they will live, but they will die of natural causes until the disease actually takes over their body, but they will receive no healing.
We stated that physician suicide is only. Oh wait, can I just ask some questions?
Yeah. Yes, just you. Yeah. You're right.
So. I'm good.
Okay. Alrighty.
Okay, so, is it Negatak next or Apatak?
What?
Is it Negatak next or Apatak?
Yeah, it's the.
It's negative?
Yeah.
Okay. Alright. So, the problems with physician-assisted suicide is that it will end up going full Kevorkian, and you never go full Kevorkian. So, the arguments that they've made is that this is indirectly killing and it's not euthanasia. We have evidence to show that I will later read that it does in fact lead to euthanasia. Second, they argue that it was only terminally ill. I have evidence showing that the court's definition can be applied to many patients, including those with diabetes. They say that more people support it, and we agree with this. However, that argument is fundamentally flawed, and I'll tell you why as well. They also claim that doctors support it. However, I have evidence that claims the opposite. So first of all, they've claimed that it's indirectly killing and that it is not euthanasia. Well, in the Netherlands, it started with indirectly killing, and it started with people who had serious terminal illnesses. But with the definition that has been laid out, which is, the court defines terminally ill adult patient as a person 18 years of age or older who has an incurable or irreversible condition that without the administration of life-sustaining treatment will, in the opinion of his or her attending physician, result in death within a relatively short time. They claim that there were a couple of months to a few years, which is not actually the case. For example, Brittany Maynard's terminal prognosis was given for 4 to 10 years, not just a couple. And there are no specific timelines set out, nor for suspected death under this definition. For example, an 18-year-old college student with controlled diabetes, but who relies on medical treatments in order to maintain such control over the disease, could, under the definition of terminal illness, claim for physician-assisted suicide. Then they said that more people support it. And they're right. 62% of Americans believe a person has a moral right to suicide when, and I quote, suffering great pain with no hope of improvement. But as was stated in our constructed, over 90% of patients didn't do it when they were treated for depression. And also, according to Oregon's website, their very own government document claims that less than half patients usually actually take these drugs after prescribed. Of the 122 patients for whom prescriptions were written in 2013, only 51.6 ingested and died from the medication. If they were truly suffering, and if they were truly in such agonizing pain that this was the only way out that they saw, I do believe that we would see a higher percentage there. And then they claim that doctors support it, and this just simply isn't the case. Overall, 69% of United United States physicians object to physician-assisted suicide, 18% to terminal sedation, and 5% to withdrawal of life support. And this is from the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. So, in conclusion, I showed you how this does lead to euthanasia. In fact, awful euthanasia. In Belgium, it started with just physician-assisted suicide, and then since we have defined it so loosely so that it can be applied to everyone, people have tried to get physician-assisted suicide in Oregon who have been clinically diagnosed with depression for 40 or more years and not treated for depression, rather killed. And then on top of this, it will spiral out of control, it will go down, it's not ethical. In the Netherlands, a doctor can kill a newborn infant without the patient's consent, without the parent's consent, just because it has the chance of being mentally handicapped. In Belgium, one woman asked for physician-assisted suicide because she was transgender and got a botched sex operation that left her feeling like a monster. So now we can get physician-assisted suicide for being ugly. Now, or feeling as if you're ugly. So this definition in these regulations that have been set out for physician-assisted suicide will not contain it, will not keep it at just physician-assisted suicide, and we will see the decline in the quality of care. We will see the lack of ethics as is seen in Europe. It is for these reasons that I urge a negative ballot. I now stand open for questions.
Is there a specific person to ask questions?
Just one of the last two would be fine. Either one. Yeah.
Alright, so, I guess first off, you discussed like all the problems with like physician-assisted suicide, people come to physician-assisted suicide because they're ugly or whatever. How exactly are you stopping suicide by not passing this legislation? Like, what stops the average Joe from, just slitting their own throat or something?
Nothing does, but what we're claiming here, as we defined in our case, that the doctor has a specific role as a healer, and to make that doctor rather a killer instead of a healer completely defies the definition of a physician and is therefore.
But I mean, when it comes down to it, like practically speaking, like we're gonna need to move away from principle, like from the world of reality, right? All you're doing is stopping people who are suffering from killing themselves, whereas anybody else can already make the decision to do this. The only difference is that an individual who's like bedridden or cancerous isn't physically capable of ending their own life. So, there's a big disparity here that you're not going to address just because you're talking about principle, but you need to address it.
Okay, so you're talking about, this is for everyone, and people need this option, right?
Yeah.
That's incorrect. According to Oregon's government website, 97.6% of people who commit physician-assisted suicide are upper white class white males.
Okay. What does it matter?
So how does physician-assisted suicide provide an option for those lower economic people who will just instead buy a bullet rather than the $300 physician-assisted suicide solution that you're providing?
Well, I mean, considering, that hospice care and things like that are already available to everybody through the government, like the government will provide that if you're considered terminally ill with 6 months or less to live, you can just extend that and assume that these individuals who are terminally ill will now be afforded this option so that they do have some way to get like a caveat to get out of terminal illness. But anyway, I have some other questions now. So you discussed like in the Netherlands, doctors can like murder babies or whatever. But how will this actually extend like logically to the United States, where abortion isn't like universally legal yet? Why will physician-assisted suicide suddenly make people change their mind about abortion, which will then also lead to individuals killing babies?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that.
And why can't we just make a law that specifically states that you can't kill babies?
You can't, can I answer the question?
Sure.
Okay. You could make that law, but the point is the laws that are currently in place are not being regulated. 50% of nurses report in the Netherlands that 50% of their cases they've euthanized patients without their consent. And then on top of that, he said, like, how will we know that it won't happen here? And that's a really good argument, except for the fact that Holland and Belgium are sophisticated countries with universal health care, and in America, patients are commonly pauperized by a profit-driven healthcare. Doctors are inadequately trained, leaving patients unwanted and undignified, so it is very real that it could happen here.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
So, physician-assisted suicide would not lead to euthanasia because we stated that euthanasia is physically done without consent. We're sitting here saying that physician-assisted suicide, you have the consent because the people are giving, like the people are asking to be killed, so they have the right to choose that. The people that are sick, they have the right to want to live or not. So it's not anybody's decision to be able to tell them, oh, you should be able to live, or you can stay in a coma for however many years and die. Like, they should have the right to choose to die. Also, the physicians aren't killing the actual patients, they're killing the pain. Everybody who wants to do this, they're terminally ill, they're already about to die, they feel like they're in pain and they want to end their life, and that's what the physicians are doing. Also, the people who are sick, they want to leave peacefully. Saying that you can put somebody in a coma, that's the person, like, they may be feeling like, oh, will I die, or will they wake up from the coma? Like, nobody knows, but if they actually are being killed, then they know in their minds that they will be killed the way that they wanted to be killed. Also, it is the doctor's job to end the ease of suffering. And when she stated that this is a simple case, according to our doctors, according to the statistics, many of our doctors do believe in physician-assisted suicide. We believe that it is inhumane to sit there and watch people who are physically ill suffer in pain, and if they want to die, then they should have the right to die. That is all.
Okay.
Is it our turn to ask questions?
Yes.
No,
Okay.
there's no questions after the
There are no
speech,
questions after, was that defense? That was attack.
right? Attack, I'm sorry.
Okay. Alright, so, you said that,
Didn't you ask questions on? Oh, no.
okay, you said that, these people know that they will be killed and that they're gonna die the way they want to, correct? Okay, well, that's not true. We'll prove that in our defense speech. And then, second of all,
Wait, how is it not true?
well, first of all, patients in a Dutch study vomited up their medications in 7% of cases. 15% of cases, the patients either did not die or took a very long time to die. And in 18%, doctors had to intervene because their patients were suffering so greatly that they turned it into a full-fledged euthanasia, which was not allowed nor consented to by the patient.
That might be true, but this is a time for asking questions. And
Oh,
Lakesia
yeah,
actually
sure.
asked you a question.
Right.
So.
Okay, so,
Sorry.
No, you're
so
fine.
next question. You said that, that we know the circumstances surrounding the death, and it's much clearer this way, correct? Okay, awesome. And then you said that,
Go ahead.
okay, we will show you why that's not in our defense speech. And then, you said that, that it is inhumane to see somebody go through suffering. So what would you say to a patient who suffers for up to 104 hours after taking the physician-assisted suicide drug, struggling to breathe?
I would say that it is their consent, it is their right to choose to have chosen physician-assisted suicide, and the fact that they didn't die, it happens.
Okay, so what if I told you that in Oregon, physician-assisted suicide only requires 2 witnesses, those of a family member and those of a friend of the family. So what would you say to a patient who's being coerced into committing physician-assisted suicide?
No comment.
Okay. What would you say to an instance in which a person is homeless and it is assumed consent because the doctors don't want to deal with them anymore?
10 seconds left.
That's not consent.
That's not consent. Okay, but it can still happen, correct?
No, that's not correct.
It's not going to happen? There's going to be a perfect system?
Time.
Thank you.
Hope is trying to figure out how to make the pamphlet picture wrap text. She doesn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
I think Abe is next, isn't he?
Isn't it the,
Negative
isn't
defense?
the next defense again?
No, it's the after
Oh,
defense.
sorry.
second defense.
I have to go get my tie.
Do you need a roadmap or?
I'll be fine.
Alright.
All right.
Alright. some of the defense speech. I'm just gonna kind of go down the affirmative attack. So first of all, everything's gonna like become Kevorkian. Like lots of slippery slope fallacies. They said doctors are gonna murder hobos, doctors are gonna murder babies. Like this is just unfounded. Not only that, they made the claim that the United States is profit driven. Therefore, we're gonna start killing babies. It's gonna like lead to baby murdering, hobo murdering by hospitals. However, this is just for one, it's highly unlikely. But not just that, it doesn't make sense. If the United States truly is profit driven, you're going to keep patients alive. I mean, you can charge hundreds upon hundreds of dollars just putting an individual in an ambulance. That means if you truly want to make money off this person or milk their insurance, you're going to keep them alive rather than just like putting them down as the negative would have you believe. Not only that, they said like Belgium and Holland are sophisticated like the United States. Well, that may be true, but the United States has a separate culture from that of Europe. The United States is considerably more socially conservative than European countries, and therefore it's highly unlikely that we're going to allow this like slippery slope to actually happen. And not only that, they said like the court definition has anybody who is terminally ill as an incurable condition. However, I would assume that if we're going to be talking about physician-assisted suicide and like truly terminally ill patients, we're going to have the same definition that hospice care uses, because they discussed hospice care at length. And hospice care only considers a person terminally ill if they have 6 months or less to live. Which means that we can just simply take this other definition. We don't have to be sticking ourselves arbitrarily to one court's definition in Oregon, especially if we're going to be extending this to the entire United States. They said that there isn't doctor support, and we said that there's doctor support. So unless we want to get in like a card for card argument, we just have to argue like what a doctor is there to do. And a doctor is there to end the suffering. The doctor in this situation isn't killing the patient, like we stated. What physician-assisted suicide is simply doing is you're giving an individual a lethal dose of something, but you're only prescribing it rather than giving it to them directly, which means that the individual is still making the decision to kill themselves. And as we stated, or as I stated in questioning, individuals already can commit suicide. I mean, anybody can go out and just buy a gun and shoot themselves in the face, hang themselves from a tree, whatever. When it comes down to it, individuals are already capable of committing suicide. All we are doing is extending this terminally ill patients, individuals who are living with suffering every day of their lives, and allowing them to have the same option that everyone else does. When it comes down to things like liberty and equality, that is equality, allowing all individuals to have the same level of freedom of choice. Now they discussed putting people into these comas where they'll die naturally. However, this is just kind of silly. If they're going to call this dying naturally, you're putting an individual in a coma until they die. That's not natural. Individuals just don't go into comas until they die, unless by some like terrible accident. So what you're doing here is you're basically ending their suffering. You're just leading them to their death, except you're keeping them alive longer. When it comes down to it, there's no reason. This is basically the same thing. You're just delaying the end. And you're making them incapable of making decisions, you're making them incapable of walking around, you're making them incapable of pain, the same as death would, especially when they make their own decision to take their own life. They discussed like a case of an individual suffering for 104 hours. For one, I mean, this is less than a week of their lives that they would spend suffering constantly otherwise. But not just that, this is only an exception. In most cases, if a doctor is, intelligent enough, they're going to give the individual dosages of something that's going to kill them rather quickly. They also argued that physician-assisted suicide is wrong because like we can't make that a law because of what happened in the Netherlands. However, we have to understand that seeing this, we can build a law that has tighter restrictions, that is not so loose, not so vague, so we can make sure that all these things don't happen. We're not going to be killing incurable children. We're not going to allow doctors to start murdering babies. We're not going to start murdering homeless people. This is a slippery slope. What we have to understand is that what we are doing is not leading some kind of Kevorkian dystopia. What we're doing is giving individuals the right to make this decision to end their life. We're extending them the same equality that every other healthy individual does, and this is the logical decision. So this is why you have to vote for the affirmative ballot, because when it comes to things such as like liberty and equality, it is a person's right to life. It is also a person's right to choose to die. Thank you.
So physician-assisted suicide is only documented when a doctor is present. Out of 61 deaths this year, only 8 have been documented, time of death and conditions surrounding death. There has been, in Oregon, there was unknown, 57 out of 61 deaths that are unknown. So that could mean they were suffering from a range of 104 hours, just gasping for air, or the family killed them, or we just don't know. Our next claim that we made that it was about pain, but only 28% of patients were concerned about pain. Over 90% were concerned about depression, about dying. And you made a point about profit driven, but the government does not make money, it loses it. Doctors, you said doctors were there to end their suffering, but 104 hours of suffering, gasping for air, that doesn't sound pleasant to me. And they're incapable of decision. They choose sedation, and they can be woken up. But with physician-assisted suicide, they cannot wake back up. At less than $300, assisted suicide is, to put it bluntly, the cheapest treatment for a terminal illness. This means that in place where assisted suicide is legal, coercion is not even necessary. If life-sustaining expensive treatment is denied or even merely delayed, patients will be steered toward assisted suicide where it is legal. To say someone will pay for you to die but not for you to live, it's not right. Another Oregon resident who was 53 years old, Randy Stroop, was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Like Wagner, Stroop was reportedly denied approval for his prescription treatment and instead offered coverage for assisted suicide. Even today, people with advanced cancer, heart disease, or neurological disorder in Montana, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington may qualify for physician-assisted suicide, but can be denied and eligible for hospice under Medicare and Medicaid, either because they are too healthy or still want treatment for their terminally ill condition. The pain, as we go back to one of our first points, is, I'm sorry, but the fundamental claim behind arguments for physician-assisted suicide is that most patients who desire it are experiencing excruciating pain. As we've proven, that's not true. But this is false, because a magnitude of studies based on interviews of patients with cancer, AIDS, and Lou Gehrig's disease, and other conditions have demonstrated that patients who desire euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide tend to not be motivated by pain. Only 20% of patients who died between 1998 and 2009 by assisted suicide in Oregon, one of 3 states along with Washington and Montana where it is legal, were in pain or afraid of being in pain, according to their doctors. Brittany M., who we have talked about before, her goal with advocacy was for all Americans to have the same health care rights, when legalizing physician-assisted suicide causes the opposite. In Oregon, some physicians prescribe lethal drugs for patients whom they have known as little as 1 week or less. In Washington in 2010, half of the patients had a relationship with their physician for only 3 to 24 weeks. In 2010, only 1 out of 65 patients in Oregon who died as a result of physician-assisted suicide was referred for psychiatric or psychological counseling. In fact, proper palliative care is languishing in Oregon. In 2004, Oregon nurses reported that the inadequacy of meeting patients' needs had increased up to 50%, and that most of the small hospitals in the state do not have pain consultation teams at all.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. Avery.
So in conclusion of this debate, I still believe that we should we should make it legal, because they have been running on fallacies of slippery slope and taking note on the Netherlands, which is not the case for Americans. We stated that physician suicide is with the consent of the patient, and it will not lead to euthanization because it first starts with the consent of the patient. And for our second one, the government does not run the hospital, so it declines on theirs. We are about liberty and equality for humans, to have the right to live. And you should vote for our side, because
We did not run off of fallacies and do not focus on the Netherlands when, we did not run on the fallacy of slippery slope amongst the Netherlands and saying that we are going to be, that sooner or later we're going to be killing hobos. We kept to the right to choose and keep the consent of the patients. Therefore, it will not lead to euthanization.
Second.
Sorry, Dr. Long, he can move if you'd rather.
In conclusion, I want to thank the judges for being here.
Sort of had to.
They're here. In conclusion, we hit on all of our 3 points. We stated why physician suicide is not the leading reason for, we decided that pain and discomfort is not the leading reason for physician suicide. We also, while describing and defining all terms, including physician-assisted suicide, and also including physician and pain and terminal illness. We also gave reasons and backed up our second backing with legalization of physician suicide causes the equality of care to decline, and also for the record, our governments do run our hospitals. And third and lastly, we already stated and we've showed evidence and have proven that that physician suicide is not an ethical practice, and our opponents are wishing and hoping for malpractice is what we're saying. Is what they're saying. It is not ethical, and we have given scholarly sources, and our opponents have said that it doesn't, that we didn't offer examples in America. In fact, we did Montana, Oregon, and Washington. I do believe those states are in America, and they said that it was only the terminally ill. They also made some points on that more people support it, and this feedback, and that doctors support it, and feedback that this is just not simply true. So, on that note, I urge a nay vote.